This is a story of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, a German tale collected by the Brothers Grimm. Once upon a time, a beautiful queen sat embroidering by her window, with its frame made of finest ebony. Suddenly she pricked her finger, and a drop of blood fell onto the snow on her windowsill. She wished for a daughter who should be white as snow, black as ebony, and red as blood. In time, her wished-for daughter, Snow White, was born, with skin as white as snow, hair black as ebony, and lips red as blood. But soon the unfortunate queen died, and her husband was married again, this time to a beautiful witch who cared only for her own beauty. Every time she asked her magic mirror, "Mirror, mirror, tell me, who is the fairest in all the land?" And the mirror always answered, "You, serene majesty, are the fairest." But Snow White grew more beautiful each year, and one day when the queen questioned her mirror, it replied, "Snow White is the fairest in the land, but you, serene majesty, are second only to her." The envious queen grew pale with rage. Furious, that very day she commanded a woodsman to take Snow White into the forest and kill her. The woodsman led the beautiful young princess away, but he could not bear to kill her. "Run and hide," he said. "I will tell your stepmother you are dead." Snow White ran in terror, deeper and deeper into the forest. She did not know where she was going, but she knew that for her life she could never return to the palace. The animals watched her with pity as she ran, but none could help her. Suddenly she came to a clearing in the forest, where she saw a tiny house no taller than herself. The house looked cozy and friendly, and because she was so tired, she decided to knock on the door and beg for shelter. But even though the door stood open, the house was completely empty. Timidly, Snow White went in. Inside, she looked around in great surprise. There were 7 little chairs around the little table. 7 places were set, with 7 little plates and 7 little mugs. Nearby were 7 little beds. Now very tired, Snow White lay down on the first one and fell asleep. While she slept, the 7 little dwarfs who owned the tiny house were on their way home from the mountains, where they dug for gold every day. Marching along in line, with their tools over their shoulder, they sang as they approached their friendly little house. "Oh my goodness," called the oldest little dwarf when he saw Snow White asleep on his bed. "Who is this beautiful child?" As the dwarfs gathered round the bed, Snow White woke up. At first she lay there frightened, but the little men seemed so friendly that she sat up and smiled at them. The dwarfs smiled back, and in a moment they were all good friends. Quickly they set an 8th plate at the table and shared their supper with their visitor. After they finished, Snow White told them how she had escaped her wicked stepmother. The dwarfs listened in sympathy and comforted her. "You will always be safe with us," they said to her. "Our home will be your home." Snow White stayed happily in the little house. Every day before the dwarfs went to dig for gold in the mountains, she cooked them a nice warm breakfast, and every night when they came home they found a good supper waiting for them. She was happy with the dwarfs, and they were delighted with her, but they worried that the wicked queen would find out that Snow White was still alive and would try to kill her. "Don't let anyone ever enter the house when we are not at home," they begged her, and Snow White promised to be careful. The dwarfs were right to be worried. Soon after the wicked queen had ordered the woodsman to kill Snow White, she triumphantly asked her mirror, "Now tell me, mirror, who is the fairest in all the land?" In fury, she heard the mirror's reply, "In the house of the 7 dwarfs lives Snow White, the fairest in the land." The queen knew then that the woodsman had betrayed her and had not completed his mission. In her great anger, she vowed to use all her magical powers to kill Snow White. The queen disguised herself as a ribbon peddler and knocked on the door of the dwarf's house. Snow White looked out the window. "I have fine laces and ribbons, my pretty," called the wicked queen. Snow White wanted a sash, and so, forgetting her promise to the dwarfs, she unbolted the door and tried on the ribbon of blue satin. The queen pretended to help her, but Snow White realized what was happening. The ribbon was pulled so tight at her waist she could not breathe and fell unconscious to the floor. At last she is dead. Her beauty will not outshine mine any more, cried the queen triumphantly, and she ran back to the palace to consult her magic mirror. Snow White lay lifeless until the dwarfs came home. When they saw the ribbon tied so tightly round her waist, they quickly loosened it, and to their relief, Snow White began to breathe again and finally opened her eyes. The queen could hardly wait to question her mirror. "Tell me now, mirror, who is the fairest in all the land?" And the mirror, always truthful, answered, "Fair thou art, my queen, but Snow White's beauty still outshines thy own." The wicked queen became more furious than ever. Once more she returned to the cottage. This time she brought a poisoned comb and disguised herself as a frail old lady. Again she knocked on the door. "I dare not let anyone in," said Snow White. "I have given my promise." "Then just try this pretty comb, my child. It will run like magic through your beautiful hair," coaxed the old lady. Snow White could not believe such a frail old lady would wish her harm, and so she opened the door and took the comb. As soon as it touched her hair, she once again fell lifeless to the ground. When the dwarfs returned home that evening, they quickly removed the comb from Snow White's hand and watched happily as she regained consciousness. "I shall not fail a third time," the queen snarled when she learned from her magic mirror that Snow White still lived. She poisoned one side of a delicious red apple, and then, disguised as a peasant woman, knocked on the cottage door again. "I cannot let you in," said Snow White from the window. "Then take this delicious apple as my gift, my pretty," said the woman. Snow White tried to refuse politely, but the woman teased her. "Do you think the apple is poisoned? Watch, I will eat half myself. Now you can eat the other." And she laughed as she handed the apple through the window. It looked so delicious, and the woman was so pleasant that Snow White could not resist. This time, the wicked queen had not failed. The dwarfs were heartbroken, for there was no way they could bring Snow White back to life. They placed her in a beautiful coffin made of crystal, so that they could always gaze at her beauty. She was never alone because the dwarfs and the forest creatures kept her company. Then one day, a handsome young prince on a white horse rode by. Instantly, he fell in love with the beautiful princess in the crystal coffin. Day after day, he came back to see her and begged the dwarfs to permit him to take the coffin back to his palace. At last, touched by his love and devotion, the dwarfs consented. As the prince's companions lifted the coffin, the piece of poisoned apple was shaken from Snow White's mouth, and she awoke to the joy of all. The dwarfs were overjoyed that Snow White lived again, and they allowed the kind prince to take her back to his castle. He soon married her, and ever after, Snow White was kept happy and safe from harm. The wicked queen choked with her rage and died on the very day of their wedding. The end.